So, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Parabellum. Tonight, we will obviously be dealing with the disaster that is this campaign in the Middle East from every point of view, because obviously there are the economic ones. Soon, Giorgio Arfaras will also join us precisely for the economic issues. Leonardo Lanzara, General Capitini, and Colonel Orlio Giorgio Stirpe. A moment of lightheartedness at the beginning, because obviously following these things from an analytical and rational point of view is very difficult right now. So bear with us, because we have people like the Secretary of Defense, the Minister of War. Now, the Secretary of War, exit, who says that the strait is open except for Iranian missiles and drones. Okay. It's a bit like saying Aladdin for those who have seen the movie, or I guess Schrodinger's Strait for those who want a more cultured reference. The other one instead is Trump, who in 12 minutes of speech, which is also a topic of debate, and we'll start right from that. He obviously asked for the involvement of NATO countries to lend a hand, and in the span of 12 minutes, he changes his mind. So they won't be there for us. He says it himself right at the moment when he says they have to come help us. He says they won't be there for us. At 3 minutes, he says some countries are really enthusiastic about helping us. They're already on their way. At 5 minutes, we don't need them. At 6 minutes, if we need anything, they should be ready to help us at 9 minutes. We want them to come help us with the strait at 12 minutes. My idea is that we don't need anyone. When they say few ideas but confused.
But rightly, he said they won. What do they need us for? But put yourself in the shoes of those who are coming to help them. What do we do? Do we do it? Do we stop at the rest area to get a coffee and then they'll let us know what we have to do? I don't know, but it was good. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Professor. Welcome, Giorgio. So I would start with the first thing. Apart from these statements, which are obviously crazy and have created a plethora of no's. Japan said no, Italy said no, the Netherlands said no, France. In short, practically everyone immediately said no. They don't want to be involved in this war. I'd like to address the elephant in the room right away with you, Paolo. Everything we see is a tactical victory. It's true. They have greatly reduced the launch potential of Iranian missiles. The Navy no longer exists. They're starting to destroy even the regular boats. I've even seen the small boats, the ones with the machine gun. They're destroying pretty much all the factories or anything connected to the production of missile drones. From a tactical point of view, apart from some friendly fire and accidents, there have been no shoot downs by the Iranians. But strategically, you can't achieve anything at all with something like this. There's also the risk that by taking out, as the leaders have done, you end up with someone whose father you killed. So he needs to prove first that he's worthy, so he has to be tougher than his father. Second, there are also personal reasons. And third, it's not a regime like Americans imagine with a domino effect. It's a regime, in my view, a bit like the church. If a pope dies, another one is chosen. So exactly what can they achieve this way, even if they keep going for weeks?
So it seems to me that the lesson, the first day of war school, they tell you something that you don't understand at first, but after some time you get it. Every war is fought when, in order to pursue a political goal, uno usa la forza organizzata. The army fights battles, wars, because it wants to reach a certain political point. Now, the real question would be, what is the political goal of the United States in this war? Because up until now, we've heard talk about running out of targets to hit. We're breaking their bones. They talk about methods, but they don't talk about goals. The same exit who says that brilliant thing, the strait is open except for the missiles, tells you that he's still talking about methods. What you see is that the United States in this kind of war, and it's not the first time, goes in with the idea that technology and overwhelming power equal victory, but that's not the case. That's never the case in wars. Otherwise, they would have already won. In Vietnam, they caused 2 million Vietnamese deaths, compared to a few tens of thousands of their own. So in theory, if we say that whoever kills the most wins, they won in Vietnam, they won in Afghanistan, they won in a lot of places. If you say we destroyed more, but that's what wins in war, who, as is rightly taught, and as Oreo will also remind us, whoever achieves their political goal, their end state, now the Iranian end state, they want to survive. If they manage to stay standing in the rocky way in the last world, they're still standing. It doesn't matter how many hits you've ever taken, you've won. And they have this end state clear. The Israelis and the other part of the coalition have their end state clear. To create such chaos in the Middle East area where their fiefdoms are, to remain in any case a predominant power compared to the others, to all the failed states they intend to surround. And they also aim to turn Iran into a failed state. In this, they are agitated that it should be theirs. They want Iran, con le tribù e I cammelli, ridurre a series of sub-ethnicities, the state of the Azeris, the state of the Balokis, the state of the Persians, and so on, and they pursue that. It's long. They haven't gone very far along this strategic line. We follow these two strategic lines. The Iranian strategic line, which still holds, is currently a bit ahead of the Israeli strategic line, which instead aims for the dissolution of the Iranian state. The American strategic line after Easter. I think they will announce it. They are building one. So the current state of the art today of the war, seen as a phenomenon of political use of organized force, currently sees the Iranians in the lead. In my opinion, as of today, you know how it is. Relationships can change overnight. At least that's my opinion. I hope I answered. Thank you.
Can I add something since we've talked about exits and clever phrases? President Trump said that basically to get through this strait, you need to show some guts because after all, you're traveling on a fast, small ship that doesn't explode at all. So according to these people, to solve the problem of Hormuz, you just need to show some guts and go through. And that's the level we're at. I think we're saying it all here.
Thank you, Oreo. I wanted to ask you something. Since the end state cannot be achieved at a strategic level, don't you think that the only way the Americans will have to look for something beyond a tactical victory is to endlessly degrade Iranian military capabilities, which in reality is more of an Israeli objective than an American one? The Americans obviously are there more to support Israel. I don't see any major advantages for them. They're making enemies of all the Gulf monarchies, and they're having problems with us Europeans too. So it's obvious that it's a matter of degradation. They can't get rid of this nuclear program. They can't eliminate it. On February 23rd, Witkoff wrote that the Iranians are 1 week away from nuclear capability, his own people, which is it's not possible. The best estimate was 3 years. Maybe the best way they have to do it, since they can't win tactically, is to keep going and continue this campaign indefinitely. But isn't there a risk that the Iran that comes after will be an even stronger Iran? From the point of view of determination in trying to strike at the Americans, maybe even carry out attacks in America, because I've noticed the broad strategy, if you pay attention. While this is happening, there's also an Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which was the last piece, the one that was left of Hezbollah. The other proxies, for better or worse, have been taken out. The ones who were in Syria are gone. The ones who were in Gaza obviously are barely hanging on. It's as if Israel is cleaning up its own backyard while they're hammering Iran to literally reduce it to nothing. Do the same. Lately, American intelligence and even some journalists have released some leaks where you can hear some audio where, as we've seen, Trump encourages, at least at the beginning of this campaign, the Iranians to take control of the situation, to rise up, etc., while the intelligence services tell him, look, if they rise up, they will be massacred by the tens of thousands. They don't have the capacity to rise up. Khomeini's guard is still extremely armed and is on the streets. It's as if they told him, look, if you incite them to do it, it will end in a terrible massacre. So in your opinion, what will be the course of action? Because before they were talking about a victory from 2 days ago, now they're saying another 3 weeks, they can keep going. Something extraordinary strategic can be achieved by continuing only at the tactical level.
It depends on whose side, because the way I see it, and I try to look at it more from the intelligence side than the operational one, the way I see it, actually there are two campaigns underway which are completely separate and distinct, the Israeli one and the American one, and we need to look at them separately for a moment. Because what the Israeli government wants to do seems quite consistent with its own interests, and I'm speaking more about the government itself than about Israel as a whole. Why do the two things intertwine? So the Israelis have been trying since the beginning of the crisis, which has now been going on for several months. Israel has been trying to eliminate the threat posed to Israel by the environment in which Israel finds itself. First of all, traditionally, they decapitate their opponent, they eliminate the leadership figures. And by now, they've practically done this within Hamas, within Hezbollah, within the Syrian Ba'ath, and now even within the Iranian context. Today, the last one, Larijani, the last one taken out. After that, since their enemy is symmetrical, the next thing to do after eliminating the leadership is to eliminate the hardware. Israel, its campaign on Iran, again, is perfectly consistent. Once air superiority is established, which was a purely operational aspect, allowing them to operate with impunity in Iranian airspace, its main objective was the Iranian capability to physically strike Israel, that is, to launch missiles at them. And so, first of all, the launchers need to be eliminated, and that's the first campaign that started, then the depots, and finally the factories. It's the same thing, a bit more difficult for drones. In the case of drones, you don't target the launches, you go directly after the depots and factories. And from their point of view, they can keep doing something like this for a long time, because now with the air superiority they've achieved, they can do it with impunity. Moreover, if they manage to eliminate Hezbollah's hardware as well, even better, they take advantage of it. And the current government also has the advantage that as long as the war lasts, there won't be elections and they stay in power. So from Israel's point of view, I would say that the approach is quite consistent. You may or may not agree with it, but it's consistent from the American side. On the other hand, from what we can see with open sources, a consistent line, as Paolo was saying, is not visible. Now, how is military planning done? It starts from the political directive, which must have a vision of what it wants to achieve, which is then transformed into an end state. To be clear, are we sure this is what you want? Yes, the American Joint Chiefs of Staff, once they understood the end state the president wanted, would convert it into a mission and pass it to United States Central Command, which would then do its planning. Now, our feeling as military personnel is that United States Central Command did not receive a clear mission, and there definitely wasn't a clear end state. So first of all, they covered their own backs, as we say in the Joint Armed Forces, and they eliminated the city's air defenses, gained air superiority, eliminated the Navy, eliminated the Air Force. Now, they don't know what else to eliminate, and they're in the situation of someone fighting a war against an anthill armed with a club. I Distrutto started hitting the anthill. You don't see it anymore, but the ants are still there underneath. Since there isn't an end, let it be clear, they'll keep hitting, as you say, for a while, until at some point on a political level, someone will come who will decide, okay, we won, that's enough, let's stop, and I can throw it out there with my crystal ball. It's almost Easter.
It's nothing new to say. Go ahead, it's done. Let's go home for Easter.
I'm giving you the victory as a gift. This is something, it's an option that Trump definitely has because he can stop this war whenever he wants. He just has to say, I won. There will be those who believe him and there will be those who don't, like us, but he doesn't care. He just wants to bring his people back. The first one interested in reopening Hormuz is Iran. So for sure they'll resume, the flow through the strait will resume, and there'll be enemies just like before.
Here, look about this, because the strait is not a matter. Tomorrow, he declares they start, let's say, sailing home, and it suddenly reopens. There's an insurance issue that takes months. There's the issue of facilities that have been shut down, and we don't know if they've released any mines or not. Right now, there are a couple of American minesweepers moving from Malaysia precisely because of this issue, to support the fact that it was a campaign very much focused on Israeli strategic interests rather than American ones. Just today, Joe Kent decided to resign as director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He says, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran did not pose an imminent threat to our nation. And it's clear that we started this war because of pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Note that he had been chosen by Tulsi Gali, so they were hardcore Supertramp supporters, and yet now they are doing an about-face. But there are also issues like, this is also news from today, since a patrol boat is going to Greece for refueling and maintenance. An investigation is being opened to see if the fire that broke out inside was intentional. Like rebellion, it concerns what happened. So as we can see, they have their own internal issues. The American goal is to avoid discussing the Epstein files and get through the elections. It's the same for Netanyahu. Finding a new enemy every day is the goal, and this works perfectly for Netanyahu. He needs to reignite a conflict from time to time, and that way, of course, no one talks about all his internal problems. Giorgio, explain to us why it's not so easy to simply reopen the strait and everything would be just fine. What are the economic interconnections in all of this? Because even if tomorrow they just leave, I'm telling you right now, the real estate, meaning the houses, those who invest in Dubai, that's minus 32%. Just to give you an idea, it's not like people are going to calm down in a single day. We can hear you, Giorgio. Try another headset. So while we're at it, I'll show you some interesting things. Because this is the biggest crisis since basically the one from Tanta, per quanto riguarda the oil crisis. It's as if there were 4 of them rolled up together. Are you there, Giorgio? No, we can't hear you. Try to join in otherwise. Try to join in if your microphone isn't on. That's the point. Here we see what the best case scenario is in case of the block and the timing. In any case, if we look, the traffic would still be halved for a certain amount of time, even weeks later. If the war were to end suddenly, that is, it would return to a traffic level of 7.5 billion. That's the best case compared to 16 as it was before, so it's less than half. Precisely because not everything reopens immediately. There are the Iranians who also continue to hit many depots and many economic and oil hubs in various countries, so there's a lot of uncertainty, there's panic. At that moment,
Absolutely.
But so far, the Houthis haven't really been seen much.
no, in fact, it's interesting. The proxies aren't very active. Let's say Hezbollah has launched about 100 rockets, but they haven't really done much.
The Houthis probably have some real problems too. They've taken a year of beatings. And besides, maybe they also want to wait and see if their former patron or powerful ally, major arms supplier, and so on. Will he make it? Won't he make it? How will he come out of this? How will he move forward? I think the Houthis have had enough, and that they also have things to deal with at home. Since recently, am I right, Colonel? Recently, they've also had things to deal with inside Yemen with a coalition whose name I can't recall right now. They have other fish to fry.
In my opinion, they can't risk too much.
They already took enough last time, so no.
But above all, they take risks. They survive because they attack, they get dismantled, and Iran rebuilds them. But if now the Iranian war industry is suppressed, the Iranians at most will only be able to try to rebuild their own potential. And they will have nothing to share with the Houthi. If the Houthi don't receive Iranian help, they can no longer defend themselves against their opponents, Emiratis, Saudis, government forces, and all the others.
Of disagreements.
Are you there, Giorgio?
If you can hear me now, yes.
Perfect.
He's erudite. So here's the story. You have a supply crisis. It's the result of the bombing of some sites. You have a supply crisis, which is the blockade of ships passing through Hormuz. So you have a lower supply of oil from the countries bordering the strait. And at the same time, you also have a lower supply of gas that starts from there and goes out into the world. Most of the oil supply from those countries goes to Asia. It doesn't go to Europe and it doesn't go to America. Whereas it's different with gas because part of it goes to Europe. So we have a supply block since the demand for non-renewable raw materials is rigid or not very elastic. Put it however you want. But it doesn't drop to the same extent as the supply does. The supply drops and the demand is more or less stable. At this point, it's clear that prices can only go up. What happens to prevent prices from rising too much? The reserves are used, so oil reserves come into play. The oil reserves partially compensate for the lower oil supply, so the demand is inelastic. The supply is blocked, but the arrival of the reserves means that this supply is higher than it would otherwise be if there were no reserves being put on the market. And this situation more or less means that for now, let's say things are not looking very good. There are a number of important repercussions, starting from other sectors that are not just oil, but also, for example, all the effects on fertilizers, gas, these kinds of things, on agriculture. So there are many more things, other interesting things. There are all those like Pakistanis who work in the Gulf countries who end up unemployed. At this point, the remittances stop coming in, and the poor families in Pakistan who live off the remittances from immigrants, let's say in Kuwait, no longer have any money. So there are a whole series of effects on the dynamics of the Gulf.
The reserves. How much can they stabilize and how much of these reserves?
The point is how much they can, let's say, over a certain period, let's say a couple of months, they can stabilize. At this point, the whole story becomes that you have to find a solution to avoid an energy crisis within a relatively reasonable time frame based on what we've heard so far. That is, the Israelis have this strategy of wanting to, let's say, pulverize their potential enemies in the air. The United States, it's not clear, but from a certain point on, they probably have every interest in withdrawing. So since the Iranians also have the same interest in selling oil because it's their main source of income, a kind of agreement could be found. In this case, the situation could be resolved in a reasonable amount of time. This explains why there hasn't been a bigger crash in the financial markets, because bond yields have stayed more or less where they were. The stock markets have gone down a bit, but they had gone up a lot before. The dollar has strengthened, as always happens during a crisis, and the price of oil has gone to 100, 102, 100. However, it hasn't really exploded. And so on. So this would be the best case scenario, meaning a solution is found within a reasonable time frame. Where the United States looks bad, the Iranians keep their regime, and the Israelis have probably managed to strike the last Hezbollah, Hamas, and everything else. So it's kind of a stalemate, a sort of stalemate that has created a huge mess. But it doesn't have any disabilities. Let's say it's resolved in the sense that Iran remains a country, a theocratic autocracy, and countries. It could also be that the Sunni Arab countries get closer to Israel with the Abraham Accords. But basically, it's something where we don't really understand what effect it had. A positive effect could be the one on Europe. You realize that your big brother is defending you less than before, so maybe you get moving, but even for this, it takes a long time. So I would say that the situation doesn't have a single interpretation. That is, the crisis ends first, even if, let's say, there isn't a real solution. In other words, it ends first with a messy solution. The better it is for the markets, for the economy, the longer it lasts, the worse it is for the economy. That's true. But beyond that,
if it were to last another 2 months and we no longer have reserves to put into the market to calm things down.
And there's also up there,
when we talk with the military experts, that the Tripoli, which is the ship carrying the Marines, should go and take the island of Karg, which is really close to Iraq and not in the Strait of Hormuz. You understand?
Yes, but they destroyed
the military infrastructure of the island, but they left the entire oil sector untouched. And 90% passes through there, which could be...
It's a bit like when during World War II, everyone would secretly meet in Switzerland. Do you have something like that which leaves some possibilities open? So that if the war ends, even with nothing happening, the worst troubles are avoided. Because the greatest destruction is avoided. It's possible one could even maliciously think that the greatest destruction has been avoided, and rightly so. That way it's easier to reach an agreement, keeping in mind that it's in favor of an agreement. There are certainly Iranians who live off raw materials for oil, but there are also all the Asian countries that are the biggest importers of raw materials from the Middle East. So it's also like that. You shouldn't look at it only from a European perspective. So I would say that the most likely scenario is that at some point everyone will wear each other out. Also keep in mind a series of economic factors that have nothing to do with oil. Israel will be extremely efficient and clever. But there are 10 million inhabitants, 7 million they can count on, but out of these, 300,000 are out fighting wars. And at a certain point, you can't afford to have so many people at war, with the economy needing those who have gone to be soldiers. And not only that, but it's an economy where both the construction sector and the tourism sector are very important. So from a certain point on, an expensive war, which creates a huge budget deficit and takes away 300,000 people to become soldiers. There's no more tourism, you build less, you do this and that. There's also a kind of economic constraint for the Israelis themselves, who at a certain point might have an interest in pulling back. For the United States, the problem is more one of credibility than economics. For the Iranians, there's the problem of selling oil. For the Asians, there's the desire to have oil and gas. And for the Europeans, it's the same. So if you think only in economic terms, which doesn't mean it's right, if you use only economic variables and don't include the other variables we mentioned earlier.
And from the point of view of selling gas instead, because gas, I heard Italy is using its own gas reserves, which aren't that many because, yes, there are some.
Yes, but now a hot period is starting. Yes, okay, but we shouldn't either then. The whole point is that if you extrapolate what happened and project it forward for a year or two, it's clear that the story changes for the Russians as well, who are earning more now because they've been allowed to sell oil that's stored on ships sailing around. Okay, someone says, yes, I agree, but it's only a few days. And in any case, if that's the situation, the Soviets, the Russians, all this money here and not there, they get more of it. Let me explain with a very simple example. Last year, the average price of oil was $70 per barrel. Now, let's say it goes up to 100. Actually, to make the math easier, let's say 140. It lasts 2 months, so for 2 months you have 2 times 70, right? But if you divide these 2 months by 2 times 70 by 12, you get that the price, which is 140 divided by 12, comes out to 10 euros or something. So it means that on average in 2026, the barrel will be 80. That is 2 months of dramatic crisis. Once the crisis is resolved, things get sorted out. It turns out when you divide it on an annual basis that the crisis amounts to 80, not 100 or 140, and it's $10 more per barrel compared to the previous year. I mean, you know, with the economy, you can play a lot of games. In reality, everyone's economic interest will end with this war, though its motivations may be entirely different. So you can't do it, but if you manage to create a model where this whole crisis lasts a couple of months, you'll see that then the situation gets absorbed to some extent. The easiest example that comes to mind is having 2 months of a barrel crisis. Then the crisis subsides and you take the median, and everything is resolved. So it's hard to say. I think this doesn't benefit Putin from an economic point of view. It's not an economic favor to Israel or to the United States. I can't understand the logic of what they're doing, and it's in Iran's interest.
The Israeli stock markets are doing well right now, just like the Israeli stock markets are doing well. They were the only ones going up compared to there.
You have to see how and why, because yes, it depends. There you always have to do very specific analyses to understand why they go up or don't go up. Because, for example, in the United States, I mean, you can say that the American stock market goes up in traditional sectors, goes down in high tech, but that's how the sector works. I wouldn't give much importance to these things. Here I would say that the economy doesn't help to find a solution. So this, if you allow me, is a final summary.
So I have a question. First, a namesake from an economic point of view, just to try to understand the Israeli perspective. My question is this. Considering the way Iran's economic structure is at the moment, when it's taking these hits to its economic infrastructure, not oil extraction, but industrial production, which has never been a big one, that at a time when Iran doesn't have many great friends around the world who will help it with reconstruction, the reconstruction of the industrial and military apparatus, which will allow Iran, extremely angry but disarmed, to rebuild its military potential to threaten Israel again. How long will it take? Months, years, or decades? Because if it were something that takes a long time, this would explain the Israeli strategy. And also the fact that even economically, the Israelis feel at ease. Because they probably imagine that they won't be under pressure for much longer.
Maybe with some question marks.
Yes.
So can it help Iran? Let's do a simple calculation. The Russians don't have enough money to cry, so no. The Chinese might have an interest in things like the Silk Road, rebuilding, doing things. But the Chinese are interested in ports and roads, not in industrial reconstruction. So even if they start building ports and roads again, the reconstruction of industry remains. So I agree with you. Thank you here as well. The Gulf countries, the easiest thing is for them to join the Abraham Accords and start financing the reconstruction of Iran. So from this point of view, Iran is a country that is industrially in very bad shape and rather poor for years and years. And from this point of view, the Israeli strategy turns out to be effective. So I agree with your objections, and then the objections to the analysis, we are in agreement. And so it's not clear who could help Iran, because the Chinese are the only ones, but they build ports and roads, and then the Russians don't have any money and so on. So it's proven. And even if the Iranians started selling oil, because, well, there's something very interesting to consider, since the country in the world with the largest oil reserves is Venezuela, with 304 billion barrels. Next is Saudi Arabia with 200 billion, 159 billion barrels, and Iran with 209. And then moving on, you have the United States with 46 and Russia with 80. So the oil is in the hands of these countries. The point here is how much oil is actually being extracted, because in Venezuela, only a minimal amount of the oil underground is being extracted. If you do all the calculations to completely eliminate the reserves, it would take 925 years, but it's clear that if they start drilling again, the number goes down. But in the case of Iran, it's 122 years. In the case of the United States would exhaust all their reserves in 9 years. Thank you all.
You just said the most important thing in this live right now, and you didn't even realize it. 9 years?
No.
9 years, so one. In fact, this whole thing bothers me because it makes me wonder if there's a kind of race in Trump's affairs that I can't find anywhere else. So, doing this calculation, reserves with the current extraction rate, pay attention, so without increasing or decreasing, just as it is now, the United States has 9 years, and in 9 years they'll have used everything up, and Russia has 21. The majority of the world's wealth is concentrated in Venezuela and around Hormuz. And this is no laughing matter because the next step is to determine how much I can achieve. The demand for oil, if the demand for oil goes down. According to forecasts, it turns out that the demand for oil, which is now around 30% of gross domestic product, should drop to 20% or just over 20%. So it's a moderate decrease, and for gas, it's even stable. So we have a projected demand for oil that's slightly decreasing, and for gas, unchanged, even with all the measures. Reserves that are concentrated outside of the three main players. The United States will run out in 9 years, Russia in 20, and China has none.
However, excuse me, Professor.
Is it a neutral question as it seems, or is it more important than it appears?
However, excuse me, the oil from Venezuela is not suitable for making.
It's terrible. It needs to be refined.
Exactly, it's not the raw materials.
Classic ones and more expensive objects.
Yes, that's another matter. Again, it's very heavy, it costs more, but the same goes for the Saloyo. What I'm saying is, without going too much into detail, there is also this very important aspect, because there is a depletion of the main resources, which are oil and gas. Regarding the countries that can afford not to have an international policy, but if the stories I'm telling are true, all the reserves are somewhere else. For example, another interesting thing is the gas reserves. Attention, here I had the scoop. The gas reserves are in Russia. Obviously in a monstrous quantity, but Russia has over 3,000 missiles, so it has the bombs. But after Iran, Iran has about the same amount of gas as Russia, Qatar a bit less, and Turkmenistan even less. I mean, Iran has 3 times the gas of the United States, so the gas is concentrated in Russia, but Russia doesn't count because Russia is stopped. Russian oil, on the other hand, is running out. The gas is in Iran, Qatar, Turkmenistan, Saudi Arabia, and so on, but most of it is in Iran. All of this should be imagined and
from a strategic perspective to secure resources for the next 20 years. We all know
his circle. They know these things. I mean, if I know them, they know them too. But do they use what they know to have strategies? Or did they simply go there just to play dumb? But I don't have even a bit of deep state. Is it still around? They ask for ingenuity.
Look at this. Now let's go back for a second to the military issue, because this gives another weight to the things we're seeing. The minesweepers, the Tripoli that's been moving lately, Trump, who just in these hours, yesterday and today, was saying, aren't you afraid of another Vietnam? They asked him the question and he said, no, I'm not afraid of anything. On the contrary, he's starting to get the American public used to the famous foot on the ground, which was a taboo until just a couple of weeks ago. And here I want Paolo and Iorio, because now, thanks to what Giorgio told us, we can connect them. Because otherwise, what would be the point of landing on this island of Karg, where practically 90% of the oil produced by the Iranians passes through? But if you combine the fact that you can win it since you seize that island and tell them if you want it back, now you have to do it on our terms, this way you can impose a victory. Then whether they stay there is another story, I don't know. By connecting these things, this American need and the necessity to close something strategically that you can't achieve tactically, it seems to me that Karg Island becomes something you have to control with boots on the ground, because otherwise you don't really have control. And it's remarkable that in these days they've bombed all the military structures, but they haven't touched the oil facilities at all.
So the question is, if you want the island of Karg back, will you make peace? That's it. Did I understand correctly?
Think about this, Paolo. As Giorgio said, the only income they have to rebuild is oil. They don't want to destroy, they don't want a disaster. The Americans need it too. They seize it and come to an agreement. In my opinion, it's the best choice to avoid total disaster. If they lose their ability to rebuild, then I die at Sassoni. All the Philistines who have already shown they can do it to others as well. It makes sense.
No, it does make sense. The test of the stage makes sense. But there are a series of buts, however, that from one side to the other could demand for. It's something to do. It's the thing to do, or it's the thing to avoid. Let's do it. Let's go by elimination. They manage to take the island and therefore shut off the tap of any possibility for Iran to export and to have wealth. All right, and here they end the war. Israel is in. If we accept as true the assertion that a fairly significant part of this action comes from the fact that Israel has an undeniable ability to put pressure on the American leadership, it's not like there was less of it today. It has the same reasons it had before. Now, without getting into too much speculation or strange things, there could be pressures of various kinds, a more or less organized lobby, or the possibility of blackmail directly from some figures within the establishment, from Trump onwards. There could be many. I mean, is Israel okay with ending it like this? A kind of version with estrogen of last June's attack, just to say. And so it's something that has left all the possibilities open. He doesn't achieve his strategic goal. Because what we want to remember is that the beginning of all these wars from October 7 onward is that Israel changed its approach. By thinking this way, we can't keep winning every battle and just preparing for the next war. They thought this was the right time to say we won't need to fight wars every 5, 7, 10, 8 years anymore, as happens by annihilating the rest. This is their approach. It would mean forcing Israel to swallow a strategic defeat because it would bring them back to the conditions before October 7th, more or less. I mean, the situation wouldn't be completely changed. Of course, Syria is gone, Lebanon is half disintegrated, Iraq is gone, Iran is still there, and there is still widespread hostility. And then maybe it's fine for a few years, but that wasn't his goal. Can the Israeli government's goal really be swallowed by this Trump? For Netanyahu, maybe yes, on a purely logical level. Yes, it could be wonderful. What about the price of Karg Island, which in any case isn't an Iran-United States relationship? That island is important for the rest of the world because Iran could also respond by saying, let's do it this way. How much time will it take? I could even stay shut in for a year just to say it's nonsense. But you, in that year, in this strip here, not a single ship will pass because I'll keep firing missiles at you, rockets, and missiles. And Hormuz stays in the condition we're in now. And so the indirect pressure from the rest of the world on the United States would be felt. I don't think Iran will lose Karg Island today and then come to the negotiating table the day after tomorrow, since, as we said, for them it's an existential conflict. Iran also doesn't want to end up being bombed 8 years from now. It wants to reestablish some balance, something with a certain unity and lasting stability. Everything about war is a gamble. Anyone who bets that a move like this will change the course of the war is right to do so. But it's not a certainty, or at least it's not so obvious, that Karg is the center of gravity, as some say, not so much gravity. Here I'd like to hear from Giorgio, who can help me with this from a planning perspective. Karg Island is the center of gravity of the whole of Iran, because if it's not this, there's no point inventing in some parks.
Giorgio Alfaro it is. From an economic point of view, what are the other major sources of income for Iran? You need to turn on the microphone.
You need to turn it on. I'm not able to give an answer. I don't know that well. I think it's very important, but I don't know if it's decisive. It can be decisive because it interrupts the flow for a certain period of time, longer or shorter. That's what causes a price explosion, yes, but whether it's definitive, whether to leave it open or close it, I'm not able to say.
The center of gravity of the region, more than of Iran itself, is not Cog, it's the Strait of Hormuz, because anything produced in Cog must then be exported through the Strait of Hormuz. So, among other things, it doesn't even make sense for the Americans to go after Cog, because Cog isn't exporting anything right now anyway. As long as Hormuz is closed, it's as if they've occupied Cog from a control standpoint. Yes.
Giorgio, do you believe more in a ground intervention along the Strait of Hormuz, like in a certain area?
I believe in a marine intervention on the islands of the Strait of Hormuz, particularly on the island called Hormuz. On the island of Keshem, which runs along the coast and would prevent rockets from being fired at the oil tankers. The islands of Abu Musa and Siri, which among other things politically belong to the United Arab Emirates, but were occupied by the Shah. In the 1970s, even before the Emirates became independent, and which have always been claimed by the Emirates. But Iran has always held on to them, so Trump would actually have the chance to give a nice gift to the Emirates by returning their islands. With control of these islands, the flow of oil could resume, and again. At this point, it would be the Americans who would have the ability to open and close the tap of oil exports.
Also, because at that point, I'll follow your reasoning, which I really like. The Marines could validate some of their new doctrines. They could be the ones to set up the famous anti-access area denial bubbles that they have spent years trying to break through. Compared to the Russian or Chinese adversary, it could be the Marines who land and somehow manage to defend themselves from the Iranians, who would throw everything at them. But they might be able to do it, and if they succeed, they could create a security bubble, anti-air, anti-ship, and so on, that could really reignite and reactivate trade. Or one thing doesn't necessarily rule out the other.
Clear.
It could be taken in the same way along with the island in the Gulf.
Leo, talk to us from there in 10. Because there at 10, Gatasikova Marines plus at 10, it already starts to pulse.
So in the meantime, since you showed Tripoli earlier, by the way, you can also find it in the book. We mentioned it as the third Lightning Carrier America class because it's an aircraft carrier and helicopter carrier that can do everything. It can carry F-35s, 20 F-35Bs, which is no small thing. 20 F-35Bs are not just any aircraft, they're F-35Bs. But they can also be used for landings, as hospital ships, as logistics ships, as command ships, so they are extremely flexible. And in a landing situation, so how many Marines are arriving, by the way?
Potentially 2,500, not more than that.
2,500 to 3,000. You can't take much more than a few islands. That's it. And the single thing...
We're an elite force from the arena countries.
It can be, or how much?
You don't take it anymore, but a lot of Marines die. And that's not something Trump can allow before the midterm.
Before Easter? And anyway, these ships will arrive in 1 or 2 weeks, so it will take some time. So we've recently done some live streams about the A-10, the B-52, and the B-1, which we're now really enjoying again, especially in the live stream about the A-10. We were saying a couple of months ago or a month ago that the A-10s were in the Gulf together and were training together. That ship, the Trimaran that you showed earlier, which is a littoral combat ship, has a mine hunting role. Meanwhile, what are the A-10s doing? United States Central Command has released images showing the A-10s operating right in this theater. An aircraft that, in theory, is supposed to be retired by the end of this year. And apparently, they just can't do without it. Because it's as old as I am, but it's still there, making its presence felt, doing its job. It's clear that in a situation without established air superiority, the A-10 struggles, so we still don't see it flying over Iran. but it definitely serves an anti-drone role. They've put these advanced precision kill weapon system under its wings, which are inexpensive hydro rockets, but with a laser guidance system that's effective against Shahed drones. Arab countries, Europe, and the like, so they work. But the A-10s also do anti-ship surveillance because nothing stops an A-10 from flying over the sea and doing patrols. And if it comes across a small boat, I'm not talking about frigates or big ships with good defense systems. I'm talking about small boats. Perfect. It can hit them with Mavericks, which are air-to-ground missiles, laser-guided, actually infrared-guided. There's a bit of everything. Or hit them with the famous 30 cannon. So it's an inexpensive vehicle, which doesn't matter that much, but it has a lot of persistence in combat. We've seen it fly in the Gulf with great technique.
Its use in Iraq is confirmed, yeah.
On the ground, yes.
There are some miles. It fired on some militias related to Iraq, yes.
No finger, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
This is from March 13, Iranian militias in Iraq, Kurdistan area. So they filmed there.
Oh, I didn't know. I missed it. But it's not surprising because we're seeing more and more concrete American control of the air. It's not supremacy because we've seen how many Reapers have been lost, 999. So it means it's still not really air supremacy. But we've also seen F-18s flying at low altitudes. So I'd say the situation...
There's a problem with these strange encounters even between allies, because it's basically a dogfight, judging from some new videos that have come out. So it's a bit strange that someone wouldn't recognize 3 planes at visual range and would confuse them. There are a lot of strange things.
At the time, we said that those 3 we're talking for those who don't know about those 3 F-15s shot down over Kuwait. That seems strange to us. 3 at once. Then, maybe with Sidewinders, which are short-range missiles. There's even a video where in the same frame you can see both the one being shot down and the launcher. An F-15 isn't easily mistaken for a Mikoyan Gurevich 29 also because it's much bigger. Then again, you're a pilot by profession, not an office worker, so it seems a bit suspicious. But the real truth, I don't know it. I have some suspicions that there's something behind it, but I have no proof. I just have.
The tanker incident was confirmed by CENTCOM, but also the names of the 6. That's an air accident, nothing more, nothing less. Now, here's an interesting point. I had read that Iran wanted to make a deal on oil tankers. Can you confirm that? What consequences could there be for the economy? Good job, Liv. Congratulations. No, more than anything, maybe it wasn't seen. But by looking a bit at the tracking of the ships that have passed, because some Chinese ships have passed, some ships that still communicate with Iran, with the Russians, with the Chinese, and so on, it seems that the last ship that passed paid in yuan instead of dollars. This was news that was given about those few ships that managed to pass, which, as you know, often have flags from strange countries like Trinidad, Tobago, things like that. But actually, we know who owns the companies, but this allows very few to get through. I mean, just to give you an idea, this is a map of all the ships that have been hit on the various days. You understand that if this is the situation, no one is going to risk letting the ships through unless you have an agreement. And yes, that's why Italy and other countries are trying to reach a passage agreement with Iran. And that's why almost all European states don't want to respond to the American call. Because if you can get an agreement, you simply don't shoot at ours. Well, you stay out of this situation, that's it. So I wanted to ask something important, especially about the European position in this story from an economic point of view. Couldn't they try to do something like what the French and other ships are doing, being sent to the Eastern Mediterranean to pretend to lend a hand, but without being actively involved, let's say? and get paid for this because Trump, as we've seen, wants to get back at NATO as usual. He reiterated the usual talk. We have 50,000 men here, 50,000 men there. We defend them, and then they don't want to give us anything. Go ahead, Paolo.
Still talking about insurance. It seems to me, and I might be slightly mistaken, that the United States has proposed a solution of this kind. All right, we'll escort you. Not only will we escort you with ships, but we'll also escort you in place of the insurance, meaning for the stretch you'll travel from all. For Hormuz, there is a fund of, I think, $20 billion that basically creates a system of global insurance, which could also be a smart system. All in all, he says, this money comes back to me once you're out of Hormuz. Somehow you pay me back gradually. But anyway, I take out of Iran's hands the only strategic tool it has, which is almost closing the strait. The thing is, everything works out fine as long as ship owners are convinced to use the United States like the overnight index swap, basically at overnight index swap prices. But if little by little the system starts where people no longer trust it, because it's enough for a ship to sink, it's enough for one of these ships to be damaged. This system can hold up because it's the other tool of pressure instead of occupying the island of cargo. To say, I'll give you the ships, I'll give you the convoy escort, and I'll even give you the insurance that if anything happens, don't worry, I'll pay for it. This means, however, I repeat, that the Iranians have a very powerful weapon in their hands, because at this point they can take down 2 tankers and start causing you serious insurance damages. And above all, the news spreads that these are waters you can't cross with or without the United States Navy. With the embarrassment that follows and the economic damage that comes with it, this, for completeness, is to draw a line of contact between military action and economic effect, where one tries to mitigate the other. It's news, I repeat. I can debate the 20 billion, but it's a frightening figure. The one proposed by the Americans instead of the global insurance system is to convince the ship owners, because Trump doesn't have to talk to the countries, but to the ship owners. It's the ship owners who decide. The ship captains take orders from the ship owners, not from Trump and not even from their own heads of government. So if he manages to convince them, so an amount, so the forse riprendono. If not,
I think they wanted to involve the Europeans specifically to provide the escort around.
But the President of the United States has the authority to create a state insurance without going through Congress.
Hey,
It seems like a real delusion of omnipotence on Trump's part.
Georgia, what are you surprised about? He made the Pishy approach from the point of view of international law, not peace Rotarians.
But what about Trump's assurances? What would they be based on as a value lever? On the public debt to be issued or on the public debt already issued? If you just take a moment to think about it, you see what the guarantee is. What guarantee are they giving you? And the insurance you have taken out will be solvent. You need to have assets behind it. So would he pledge the current public debt or future public debt? To provide insurance for the ships, I ask.
To provide insurance
to them. It's not like that.
It's not an exaggeration. It's an exaggeration, I agree. But it's not just about insuring ships. It's about removing Iran's strategic weapon. Because if somehow by paying, bribing, scaring, or all of them together, I manage to get the traffic going again, Iran is left with very little to exert pressure. But the technical methods, I don't know. I really don't know the technical details. Maybe he's the anointed one of the Lord, so he can do whatever he wants.
This is about economics. If Giorgio...
This is about economics. The plan includes 20 billion in maritime insurance, with Chab acting as a key partner to back insurers covering ships.
Yeah, so, well, he wants to split the risk. I don't know, because just off the top of my head, I doubt that 20 billion would be enough. I think they're putting much more on the table. I remember numbers that are much higher. There's the impression that it's, let's say, just a stunt. Or even better, to be more elegant, a trial balloon, meaning he throws out this trial balloon and sees what the results might be. Because probably 20 isn't enough, because if there's a split at the top, a disaster, 20 becomes 30, becomes 50, then who gives us 20, but why should anyone believe it? Poi, se
The commanding lies weren't enough. You need the lies of the commanders, the help of the people, but actually there's no need for help, and also the insurance, because nothing really happens except for the missiles going back and forth across exit. This is a Christmas comedy, fantastic.
And making a housewife's objection. If Trump's insurance plan were credible, what would that mean? Does it mean there's a chance it could work? But if there's a chance it could work, Lloyd's would insure you. If they don't insure you, it's because they don't believe in it. I don't see why you shouldn't trust Lloyd's, since they've been doing this for 300 years. They even have a spy service. To know things, you should trust what they tell you.
Here there is more data, 20 billion on a continuous basis, limited to ships that meet the criteria and initially focused on hull, machinery, and cargo coverage. 5 days later, the DFC said it would be the main insurance partner with the participation of other American insurers. In other words, the administration did not create a universal, affordable, and direct insurance for all cargo, but improvised a more restricted protection system with private insurers.
Well, I don't know. If I were a ship owner, I would trust Lloyd.
Who does this?
Forgive me, I'm stepping in, but there's a lot of uncertainty at this stage. This is a situation like when the Ulti were attacking, but then they didn't attack under steroids. It's enough for a choke point, a bottleneck, a mandatory naval passage to be vaguely threatened. A drone a week to scare people, it's no longer a safe passage. That's the fact. How unsafe it is, we don't know. How many mines there are, 10,000, we have no idea. How can you insure something like that? At what price do you insure it? At what rate do you offer it? That ship's passage will probably make it or probably won't. They have no idea because it's too vague. We still haven't figured out if the Strait of Hormuz is mined. We don't know. Yes.
Because there are different types. There are dormant ones. There are those that only activate if a military vessel passes by. They're set for a specific time.
But you make sure if there's something
from the magnetic field, yes?
There are many.
So some Navy colleagues who were sailing in those parts said that, look, it's more or less like that. The Iranians' mine arsenal is something that dates back to World War I. Just to give you an idea, technologically, it goes back between World War I and World War II. You know, those bowl-shaped ones with all the spikes and stuff like that? Yes. Some mines, like our Manta mines, which look more or less like pyramids that are placed on the seabed, are difficult to detect. They have electromagnetic and acoustic mines, among others. It is estimated that their arsenal of mines produced by them, some Chinese, some North Korean, some Russian, amounts to more or less between 2,000 and 6,000 mines at sea. They say there are about 10, but where, which ones, and how, nobody knows. The interesting thing is, if you want, we can talk about it later. Let's suppose the war ends today and the Iranians don't swear on Khamenei's head if he still has one. They've never actually planted any mines anywhere, but it's enough for them to say, we did plant mines and we're not telling you where they are. Let's start thinking about demining times. Do you know how fast a minesweeper moves? 1 knot, that means 1 mile per hour. In 10 hours, it covers 10 miles of a strip of sea. The last major demining operation that took place in that area was in front of Kuwait with Saddam Hussein's mines. Saddam Hussein, very kindly, before they got rid of him, had given the locations of the minefields. Where had he placed these mines? And even though we knew where to look, and even though there was a fleet of about 30 minesweepers from all over the world, the operation lasted 4.5 months.
And the Italians were there.
The Italians were there, and they
did it near the coast of Odessa when the Ukrainians at first laid some mines, also because someone was going around.
These are operations to say that it's not like it ends tomorrow and reopens in a month. if there's the threat of mines, because it shouldn't just be a threat, it should have, as Leo rightly said, it should have the certainty that there aren't any. Because look, at first the sailors would sound the alarm for mines, but it was just refrigerators. A refrigerator floating in the water looked like a mine. The Navy banned throwing black garbage bags into the sea because when they floated, they could look like the back of a mine. Just imagine the level of tension in the situation, so keep that in mind. A demining operation that the whole world should take part in, even in peacetime, takes a few months. So the Strait of Hormuz, even if the war ends today, we're in for a hell of a mess, excuse my language, for at least several months. Per half the summer, if not more.
Che però vedi, la gente ha paura.
And we could intervene ourselves. Also, because Italy has a good relationship with Kuwait, it's a friendly country. We've had a stable military presence there for years. Now, there's this issue that we've lost a predator. We have 4 Eurofighters, and we're good.
And we're among the best in the world. We have minesweepers, very old mines, Lerici class, Gaeta class, stuff that's 35, 40 years old, pretty old stuff. But we know how to do it, and we do it very well. And then you can't do it alone. You should do it with some kind of, that's where, yes, Trump could say, send everything there. Last time, even the Japanese came to do demining.
The Indians, the Chinese, Belgium,
the Navy.
The Belgian Navy has practically almost all experts.
And do you know that the Belgian Navy took its mine clearance doctrine from the Italian Navy? I mean, we were the ones who gave them our doctrine, how it's done, basically the doctrine to explain how it's done. But there's still that period, 4, 5, 3, 6 months from when it ends. Yes, and at that moment...
Let's remember that even the Indians, first and foremost, are interested in having the flow resume quickly. So in turn, they will probably organize themselves to avoid it.
There's a question.
Are you going to try to start a China-Russia war now? I mean, the Russians are bogged down in Donbass, the Chinese have just lost 2 oil suppliers, and the Americans are already engaged in Iran. No one is interested in doing anything. In fact, it's almost embarrassing.
It's like a game of Risk. When you don't know what to do, you attack, but not Kamchatka.
But then, by the way, that famous Tripoli is actually coming from the Pacific Quadrant. And it's peculiar because the fact that Trump trusts to remove such an asset from what should be a priority quadrant for the United States. You see the book, it's peculiar. Does it mean he's betting on this Iran thing? Anyway, guys, it's a good thing that the United States needs to focus on the Americas, on their own hemisphere.
Equipping dogs with legs.
Thank goodness for the new Moron Doctrine. If not for it, who knows what might have happened.
In fact, the Nike are very angry with him.
In fact, Vance, if you notice, has almost disappeared. You hardly hear anything about Rubio, who wasn't there before. And now comes Christian Kufini's question. According to the English diplomat who was present at the American foreign policy negotiations, Witkoff and Kushner are the ones making the decisions, and they are described as Israeli assets. It's not so wrong, because if you look at what Witkoff said on the Hill on February 23rd, he said they were a week away from making nuclear bombs. What, 3 years? It's a week less than what his own intelligence services are saying. But is that BB's wet dream? So most likely they worked on it. I don't think it takes much to change Trump's mind, since he changes it himself about what he says 6 times in 12 minutes. So I think it's also pretty easy to manipulate him to make him change his mind about things. So most likely, even analyzing what's happening, the one who's benefiting is Israel. Israel can only benefit whether they win strategically or win tactically. Anyway, Iran has suffered huge damage and for quite a while won't be able to retaliate. I, whose name is Garvino, say that if this time a world anti-war breaks out, it's not my fault.
And the previous times. And
the previous times, as Giorgio Grazzi rightly says,
he doesn't have to cross the bridges in Sarajevo. That's what's important, that he doesn't cross bridges. Sarajevo, thank you.
I wanted to say something. I wanted to say something
Go ahead, go ahead.
now about the story of the First World War breaking out and the public debt of Great Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. They were the belligerents on the day war was declared. Nobody moves, only the prices change. That is, they thought like the politicians and generals thought, that it would last a very long time, and so the financial markets didn't react. The lack of reaction from today's financial markets, this is a, let's say, tricky question, is a repeat of the European public debt situation, like Sarajevo. If I say it will last only 2 months, like before, is that a mistake or are they right? This shows financial markets aren't always all powerful.
But wait, Giorgio, look, you're the economist here. You're the one who has to answer these questions, not us. It's a mess that's starting to get to us. No?
Excuse me, but the economist can't predict the future. He deals with unknowns and doesn't know what will happen, Giorgio.
Let's point out that in the last 8-10 years, we've gone from one crisis to another, COVID, the war in Ukraine, and so on. It's not like the markets and those who work in the markets haven't developed crisis management mechanisms, given that so many have happened in sequence.
There have been continuous bailouts. The real story of finance in recent years is the intervention of central banks. And which central banks have, let's say, flooded the markets with liquidity? Just like back then, the central bank buys the bonds of ordinary credit banks. These ordinary credit banks at this point have a lot of liquidity because they have sold the securities. But instead of using this liquidity in the real markets, they use it in the financial markets. That's why there's a super growth in the prices of financial assets, because all the liquidity, instead of ending up in the real economy, ends up in the financial economy. So the growth of the financial markets, even though nothing has really happened, actually hides, let's say, the incredible growth in the money supply by central banks. And so this thing acted like a kind of sleeping pill. So the financial markets, full of liquidity, kept rising, and nobody wanted to stop and think whether it was the right thing to do or not. That's the story. The question at this point is, what kind of bet can the financial markets make? The financial markets can make this bet if there is a serious crisis. That's when the central bank steps in again, buying government bonds that are owned by commercial banks. At this point, again, this liquidity would end up in the markets, which explains why the markets haven't crashed. If that's the case, then nobody really knows how it is. I just want to say that behind the European bonds of Sarajevo, there was a lack of understanding about what was happening. Behind the calm of today's stock and bond markets, it's probably more than just a judgment about Ormus or who knows what else. There's the idea that in the end, the central bank intervenes not by cutting or raising rates. Be careful, by buying government bonds, thus providing liquidity to the banks, which in the end use it. In the financial system which stands, so it's always an analytical problem, you shouldn't put judgments of that kind in the mouths of financial markets.
But look, that's interesting, Giorgio, because the other day I was doing a live session with an aspect of artificial intelligence, and we also talked about the first prototypes of BlackRock's Aladdin. What is it? It's not a software that went there to speculate on who knows what stocks. It basically tried to see the trend of a stock in the worst case scenario and in the best case scenario. And so let's say it predicted a safe trend, a guaranteed return. They've probably already done all the calculations on what the scenario could be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and so on. They already know how to handle it also because there's a limit. No, I'm asking our military, there's a technical limit. We have an aircraft carrier that's in dock, that's refueling, and so on. We have those others who had a fire. How long can they operate before they need a break? Also for you, Leo, crews, maintenance, and so on. How self-sufficient is one in terms of ammunition, food, not fuel? Because I know they can go a year, 2 years without a trip, but everything else, fatigue, men, cells, and so on. A, answer, A, no.
You mentioned the military earlier, so I lined up behind everyone.
Pretty much everyone, and I joined in for what he knows about this part.
I'm completely ignorant. I'm the lowest on the totem pole. So there's a whole logistical supply system around every combat ship. There are logistic ships. We have them too, the Volcano class. That's exactly what they're for. Theoretically, they can last more than a month, maybe even two if they're regularly resupplied. But then there's also the issue of human fatigue. This also applies to Israel because at the beginning of this war, they used 200 fighter jets, maybe even more.
I think so.
That they have 250, 300, that's a lot. Then you also have to do the regular maintenance on those vehicles. So on an aircraft carrier, there are
The accidents could already be a sign that not all the vehicles were well prepared and that a level of stress and inattention is starting to set in.
there's fatigue among the personnel who pilot and fatigue among the personnel who do the maintenance. I was saying, then there are 75 fighter jets on average on a Nimitz or Ford class, sometimes even more, but on average 70 to 75. That's quite a lot, just fighter jets. Then there are helicopters, there are Hawkeyes, which are the radar planes, the Hawks, there are the mail planes, and so on. 75 fighter jets. Of course, there are also peaks. You can carry out many sorties per day. I don't have the exact number on hand right now. I can find it, but we still need to normalize it. There is, I think it's called a surge, meaning there's a moment when the number of sorties is extremely high, but then you have to slow down to let the crew rest and to work on the vehicles. It's hard to give a time frame. There are a thousand variables, but it can't go on indefinitely with just one aircraft carrier because there's one that's operating in front of the Persian Gulf. The other one, the Ford, had arrived. Then there was the fire incident. It seems like it's returning to Crete, if I remember correctly, but I'm not sure.
Here,
Another one is arriving. The Bush, I think it's arriving. I don't remember where it is. It must be in the middle of the Atlantic. Iraq, 2003, there were 5 aircraft carriers. I'm going from memory. Luckily, Paolo is here to help me, to give me a hand, actually 5. Quindi, the more I go on, the more it seems to me that the deployment wasn't complete. When this story started, the deployment was still in the build-up phase. There was an acceleration for reasons we know. A fair situation.
Because not everyone has seen all the live streams. The reason why it started at a certain time of day, usually they started at night, was because, and there's also a bit of a political trap there, let's say it, having invited them to hold parliamentary negotiations. Then they came back and gathered specifically to talk about what they had discussed with the Americans and the humanitarians. And they hit them right there because they had gathered. Now, thinking badly is easy. It's a sin. Who knows if Bibi or Trump would do it? I see Trump less likely to think of such a trap. But the Israelis giving them a reason to gather, and to quote the glorious bastards,
but
first or in a single basket.
But sooner or later, wars end, you also have to come together. And does your word mean anything now if your history is that every time you hold a summit, it's just to break your promises or kill the people who attend? You understand that any commitment made in something like this, when you go back home, people look at you and say, yeah, sure, let's hope so. I don't know.
They always fall for it. Remember when,
Yeah, you always fall for it. Look, for example, at the Kurds, the 5th time I told them, you go ahead, we'll come later. This time I said, for now, we'll think about it for a moment. Because given what happened before, considering that the last 4 times you sent us ahead, first the people we were supposed to face shot at us, and then you shot us from behind too. This time you do it. Even the Kurds, who after all don't really have many choices. I tell them, if you want to stay, fight this last war. But since they've heard this 5 times, they barely believed it now. So there will come a time when we'll have to assess how much the word of the states is worth. And look, the word of a state is a strategic weapon. It's a very powerful weapon.
Here, look, Paolo, look, you've raised an important point. Since they've played this thing about let's meet at a meeting, and then they take out the leaders of Hamas, now probably with Iran and so on. in the long term, in your opinion, what impact will this Israeli scorched earth strategy have just to get the chance to settle scores with someone?
Personally, no coalition stays together just out of fear. Now, if you want to build a leadership position in a part of the world by instilling fear in all your neighbors, treating them like Milsebez, treating them like the last roll of carto, and knowing that the only option they have is either to keep quiet, obey, or get a bomb dropped on their heads as the premise for an alliance. Go not too far. Also considering that if you look at the territorial size of Israel, which is just a bit bigger than Basilicata, it's not just to say, with 9 million people and around it roughly 400 million people that it wants to treat as subjects. The numerical premises just aren't there. They don't exist unless Israel is forced to live in a perpetual state of war or extended control, which was exactly what it wanted to avoid. With all this circus that's being set up, there are also the Abraham Accords here, which we keep bringing up. But those were times when no one was shooting. So if no one is shooting, if people go to Dubai because it's a nice place to be, because Iran, all things considered, is contained. Okay, let's talk about the Abraham Accords. But today we're talking about the Abraham Accords. With Syria that has disappeared, Lebanon that's being devoured, and Iran that's being bombed. In short, if someone finds themselves in that area, and who says that in 10 years, it could be my turn because somehow I'm no longer fitting with Tel Aviv's strategy. So why should I do it? I mean, distrust has been introduced into the equation. There was never really great love, but at least there was convenience. But now, between convenience and distrust, all in all, a Gulf state would find it more convenient to have a treatment agreement, some peace with Iran, since that's where they have to live. Qatar is right across from Iran. The Emirates are right across from Iran. They have to find a position of balance. Since Iran has shown them that no matter how much they're protected by the Americans, no matter how much they're under attack from the Israelis, just 4 cannon shots, they always manage to get between action, and their economic and reputational wealth gets sent down the drain. So it's better for them to find a balance with Aviv Tehran rather than with someone else who can't protect them 100%. These are things that end with fireworks. Someone starts to think about it.
We'll leave the off-topic questions for the end, so let's not bring them up now. Remind me later. We saw that Zelensky offered anti-drone protection. He was mistreated. Actually, there was an announcement from Zelensky yesterday saying that they have sent more than 200 experts to various countries. It was Trump who first said yes, then no. Baby abuse, what does that one look like? However, actually, 200 Ukrainian experts have already been sent to various countries, 4 or 5 countries, Kuwait, Brescia, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and so on. Official statement from Zelensky. So I don't know why people are still obsessed with Zelensky. It's interesting to see Orban in Hungary, where Orban's entire political campaign is Zelensky, Zelensky, Zelensky. So much so that the other Magyar at a certain point said, hey, I'm here too. Yes, I mean, it's not just one of us. There are 2 of us. There are 3 of us. So it's interesting to see how fixated some people are on these things. So are there any other points you want to go over? Oreo, do you want to respond to?
But about the issue of trust, I thought you were mostly talking about America and trust towards the United States. And that's the problem with the leadership of Trump, because Trump is literally using the United States as if it were the biggest toy in the world. He is the owner of the toy and wants to have fun, and he clearly doesn't care much about what will happen after his presidency. So yes, he is actually largely compromising the rest of the world's trust in the United States. Why soft power? The American soft power was probably the most powerful card with which the United States exercised its hegemony over the world, and Trump is compromising it. In fact, when he argues with Canada, with Europe, with Australia, or with Japan, It's not like Canada, Japan, and Europe end up isolated. He's the one who ends up isolated, and the others he attacks tend to stick together because they trust each other more than they trust him. So this is a problem that probably even Trump's successor, even if it's a Democrat, will have to face. A big problem of trust from the rest of the world. As for Israel, however, here I agree a little less, because on Israel's part, the strategy of targeting the leaders of its opponents is a typical targeting strategy against an asymmetric adversary, or if you prefer, it's a typical counterterrorism strategy. You target, strike, and eliminate from the top down the leaders of the opponent, asymmetric. And since Israel's real opponents, the ones who cause physical harm to the Israeli population, are asymmetric opponents, clearly Israel. There's no concern that if I eliminate my opponent's leadership, then in the end, who do I negotiate with? Because Israel has never negotiated with terrorists and has labeled all its asymmetric opponents as terrorists. It's a different story, however, with nation states. In fact, this kind of strategy is not used with the Gulf states, not with Jordan, not with Saudi Arabia. The fact that it does this with Iran, which is a nation state and not an asymmetric adversary, suggests that Israel has completely taken the option of regime change off the table. It doesn't plan to talk with a new Iranian government because it doesn't expect there could be a new Iranian government. And it has no intention of talking to the current Iranian government either. It simply wants to put it in a position where it can't do any harm. Whether this strategy works or not is yet to be seen, but from an intelligence point of view, I see this as Israel's modus operandi.
Yes, it's interesting because the Americans maybe see Iran as a snake, thinking that if you cut off the head, it's over, while the others know it's a hydra. There are many heads. In fact, they didn't just take out the last one. Even the messages that came out on X, they made sure to say, no, we took him out ourselves on our own without American help.
The Americans have no idea where the Iranian leaders are.
While the Israelis don't believe they have any particular intelligence interest, while I imagine that Mossad knows everything that's happening over there.
Not only do the Americans not have the slightest idea where to go, I absolutely agree with the colonel, but I've thought so from the very beginning. The famous American end state isn't some kind of regime building or some elaborate government architecture. We've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, and now in Venezuela. They have to go break what needs to be broken, disarm whoever needs to be disarmed. Then if it turns out there's a government, if there's a popular revolution, then I can talk to them. Fine. If there isn't, I declare victory and go home. Because I've disarmed them, I've taken away their missiles, taken away their launchers. On June 25, the Iranian nuclear program had been wiped out, and now it's not anymore because they're still hunting for it. So we're dealing with people who claim they destroyed the Iranian nuclear program 8 months ago, and yet today they're still hunting for it. Accountability, which is a word that doesn't exist in Italian, we have to translate it. It's an Anglo-Saxon word. I would say that the Anglo-Saxons, first of all, those over there, they themselves don't even know what it means anymore. Because anyone could say to you, hey, in June you said the Iranian nuclear program had been destroyed, but here we still are. No one points these things out to him. It's really serious. By now, the colonel is right. Trump is playing with the American toy until it breaks.
There's an American commentator who said, it's like a 10-year-old kid who, as soon as he discovers the flamethrower, starts burning all the gardens around him. Nice image. There's a question for you from Cristiano Goffini, Arfaras. When it was normal for the monk to use his position of power to enrich himself and his clients, just like Donato does, He's talking about insider trading that also happens in wartime affairs. There are some strange bets on Polymarket. They happen half an hour before an American attack breaks out. And there's someone making a lot of millions, maybe because it was really someone from United States Central Command or some soldier who knew. But it seems to me that we've reached enormous levels with Elon Musk, Till, and all the others.
Yes, here it's more interesting to broaden the analysis in the sense that it's true. So in fact, denouncing means that in the end, after a while, you get exhausted from always saying, here you go. Bitcoin will enter the central bank's assets. Bitcoin explodes. No, that's not true. It crashes. You buy it before making the statement. The point is something else. There are two very interesting articles in Foreign Affairs about this story. The first one says, in a new political regime where there is the leader and a series of yes men surrounding him. The epitome of this way of seeing things was Putin, who was alone in front of a huge table. And after that, the table was filled with people sitting very far away. And everyone tells him yes. No one has the courage to tell him they disagree. The American system is becoming a system where there's an autocrat surrounded by yes men who tremble. The Russian system has been like that for a long time. It seems, according to Foreign Affairs, that even in China, ever since Xi started removing generals who don't agree with him, then anyone who disagrees with him is labeled corrupt. This part is an old story. So that's how things are there. A system where the three powers become more and more autocratic, but also more personalized. Second article, also from Foreign Affairs, which talks about kleptocracy. Because within this concentration, let's say, on the figures, there is also a whole system of favors, of enrichment of those around them, and so on. Maybe less so in China, but little is known about China, certainly in Russia and the United States. That's how it is. So we are facing a new political system because even in the Soviet Union, for those who know Russian history, in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party had internal debates with some members dissenting and disagreeing, though these were not public. After that, it's clear that people don't make any mistakes, but inside there was debate. Here, in the case of our friend Putin, this doesn't exist because they don't discuss. There is no dialectic. So there's also a leap compared to the post-communist era. It's not true because there's also a leap that's even more concentrated. Power, because there the power belonged to a party, not to a leader. That's true.
I always point out that in the Soviet Union, 193 million people, Russia had 600,000 KGB men today under Putin. Even though there are 142 million, there are 512,000. So
it's union. It's a union. So why was it important for me to see these two articles from Foreign Affairs? Instead of saying, look at that guy with the carrot hat, he's crazy. Here we have something that's worse, the carrot hat crazy. Because it's a system where there are no so-called checks and balances. There aren't any like the checks and balances in the United States, which is something everyone talks about. Hey, checks and balances. I'll point out one last thing about this site. The difference between democracies and autocracies is the speed at which decisions are made. Autocracies make decisions quickly and make huge mistakes because they don't thoroughly discuss every decision they make. Democracies are slow, but they make fewer mistakes because they discuss all the variables involved more thoroughly. So anyone who says they're against democracies because they're slow and boring is actually anti-democratic. In fact, they want risk. They actually want to lose because normally autocracies make a number of mistakes that democracies don't. But simply because they discuss things much longer before actually doing them. So we are in a system where in the United States and in Russia, decisions are made without too much reflection. So they go as they go. Very badly, you see, there was a joke going around in Moscow that said the difference between Putin and Hitler. That Putin thought, like Hitler, he could take Kiev in 3 weeks, just like Hitler took France in 2 weeks. He forgot that he didn't have German industry or the Wehrmacht behind him. So you make these decisions like that 3 weeks, 2 days, because it wasn't different from what's happening now. I go there, I do boom, 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 like that.
Then I would also add the BB in this round of personalisms, etc.
With everything, even the whole round of strange courses. But here I haven't read anything. I suspect that's how it is. So what I want to say to answer those who ask us the question is that we are in a new phase of international politics linked to the autocratic and personalistic concentration of power in universes that are becoming more kleptocratic, the Cronus Exalta. Either we understand this or we keep being surprised by strange things that happen but actually don't happen by chance. I take Ukraine, I go to Iran, I change my mind, I do this, I do that. It must be said that Putin at least is more consistent. He changes his mind less frequently.
So you see then, given the space.
Careful, we're in a new world where the monarch doesn't have the council. I can stop it for you like a robot, Ottoman. He doesn't have the couch telling him to stay calm.
So before answering one last question, and then we'll say goodbye because tomorrow I have to leave early because I'm in Milan at the State University. Read on the post with Professor Giannulli will talk about Ukraine, so I have to be there around 1 o'clock. At 4:30 post-meridium it starts. They tell me that the Iranians are bombing the Kurds in those areas. There, then, obviously, they have an interest in attacking or at least keeping them under control. So I thank you all, gentlemen. There's only one last issue left, that of Lara Gianni or Lara Gianni. Thank you for the intelligence. If he, out of arrogance, had been seen around a bit these past weeks to show off, since the generals could still be seen, huge mistake. Intelligence with artificial intelligence. And some drones basically tracked him, and he was literally hit near one of his hideouts. He had, when someone wants to tempt fate, they had already tried to kill him on the 28th, and he escaped.
Thank you.
Everyone repeated.
They even caught his light.
Together with him. Here, just to give you an idea. So we'll deal with these things later. We'll also deal with Cuba. Diego Batista will come back because even there, well, there are Boboni ready. Last sentence from Trump, I could even take Cuba. Why not? I could be the American president. Sure, come on.
Your son is from Foggia too, since you're at it.
Molise.
Molise, no. Not Molise. All of Molise, not Molise.
I can't find it because...
Yeah, poor guys too. Anyway, a nice quote from Gromyko comes to mind, a Soviet figure who used to say something very nice, which now makes you feel nostalgic. He said, it's better to spend 10 years discussing than to spend an hour making war. And this was said by a Soviet, a real Soviet. Now, maybe not 10 years, no, but it would be a good idea to start talking again. But to talk, you need someone to use their brain. Then as long as they have a working one, that's fine.
So we thank and greet everyone. I thank Leonardo Lanzara, Colonel Stirpe, General Capitini, our favorite economist. Giorgio helps us understand why these needs exist. Suddenly, maybe they're not even really from Trump, no, but rather induced. Ladies and gentlemen, see you tomorrow in Milan. Who's coming at 4:30 post-meridium, State University, location on Via Santa Sofia, 9 Milan, room M301, which almost sounds like the code for a tank. Wow, thank you.